We're back with Therapy is Dope with Alicia and Laura. And today I'm super excited to have Jacob Ward with us. Can't wait to hear where this conversation's going.
Hi, you guys. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Shall I introduce myself a little bit? I bet
Yes,
I'm a
please.
first time person here. So yeah, I'll introduce myself. So I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist for most of my career, except for a couple stints as like a bartender and a teacher at one point. And I am focused on technology and the ways in which technology specifically basically intersects with human circuitry. So I wrote a book that came out in 2022 called The Loop: How AI is Creating a World Without Choices and How to Fight Back, in which I thought I was way ahead of the game, and it turns out I was actually like I was just like two financial quarters early because ChatGPT came out like 9 months later. And but I thought I was sort of predicting the future of AI down the road and how it would sort of mess with our brains. And it turned out that I was in fact like right on schedule. So I've been watching my thesis come true over the last couple of years in terms of how human beings are being very quickly, our attachment circuitry is like really glomming on to AI, and all of these ancient instincts that I spend all this time articulating in the book are really getting activated in a very, I would argue, very scary way by AI.
And this is why I'm excited for this
Yeah, now
conversation.
I get why you were so excited for this conversation.
Yeah.
It is scary. And I mean, I heard this on another podcast about like when cell phones came out, how we used to have the phone directory that we would go to, and we used to actually have a bunch of phone numbers in our head that we knew. And then cell phones came out and we don't have that. And the conversation was kind of around like, well, that's not as big of a deal because like we don't need that, but the amount of information, like this isn't the phone book. This is how we think, how we organize our thoughts, how we can relate to each other, and to your point, our attachment circuitry. So I was wondering maybe if we could jump off there. What did you predict? What are you seeing? And what does it mean for the average AI user?
So some of this will be remedial for you guys, but maybe it'll be useful to your audience, right? So I spent in 2016, I did a documentary series for PBS called Hacking Your Mind. That was all about sort of explaining to people over the course of 4 1-hour episodes how the vast majority of our decisions are automatic. We like to imagine that we're in charge of ourselves. We like to imagine that we are, if we get good sleep and eat the right foods, we're going to make great choices. But the fundamental of behavioral science is that we're really not in charge of ourselves most of the time. That our decisions are made for us by our environment, by our instincts, by our emotions, in ways that we aren't even conscious of, right? And
Mhm.
before 2016, I didn't know that. I thought, well, I'm a put together human being. I can get it done. Like I don't need any of this, right? I don't have a drinking problem, right? Like I had all kinds of assumptions about myself. And that show and the experience of going all over the world and interviewing these top behavioral scientists totally transformed my life. I had to quit drinking. I had to change all kinds of things about how I lead my life. And at the same time that was going on, I was then also interviewing all of these fledgling AI companies because the transformer models that made ChatGPT possible hadn't quite come around yet, but they were about to. The next year is when the technology that made ChatGPT possible broke through. And I began to recognize, oh, wait a minute, all of these companies whose job it is to grab onto your brain wherever they can are about to have at their disposal this incredible pattern recognition system that is able to simulate human language and human creativity. And eventually I started concocting this long list of like, what are human attributes that this system could simulate? Are there any that this system can't do a really good impersonation of? And it turns out I haven't really bumped into one
Mm,
because like just every single thing from humor to romance to
Mm.
sort of the guru kind of language, all of that stuff, it does a great job with, not just because it's well built. It is a very primitive system, really. It's a pretty simple system once you understand how it works, but because our brains are built to grab onto anything that will do mental work for us, right? Like
Mm.
this is the sort of the fundamental lesson of behavioral science is like, we don't want to think it through if we don't
Yeah.
have to. And so outsourcing decisions to our environment, to our emotions, to our instincts, or to AI is a really irresistible thing for us. What I hadn't understood going into this was how this would manifest as people really falling in love with these systems in these really fundamental ways, both literally and figuratively. And as I began to recognize, like, I did 5 years as a correspondent for NBC News, and I got to interview all these people on their dime, going around the country to talk to people who, are full on quote unquote dating chatbots. And it's so easy to sort of laugh at people who are doing that, to think about them as if they are somehow, pathetic or desperate or whatever. Because I think in this country, we're really prone to blaming people for their choices when in fact their choices are being guided by nicotine or alcohol or gambling or whatever else. We like to blame the addict. And in this case, I remember this one woman, I was talking to her about it, and I was like, well, why not human relationships? What's wrong with, humans? And she's like, well, first of all, the guys in my life are horrible. And I don't want to spend any time with any of, like, all of my relationships so far with men have been awful, and I don't want to do that. And I work 2 jobs at the airport. I sleep like 5 hours a night. I don't have any time to make these kinds of connections. And once you recognize, like, oh, people who are stressed, overworked, underpaid, lonely are the perfect vector for a system that impersonates your best friend or impersonates your always on hypersexualized girlfriend or whatever else it's going to, do, because it wants to do all that. And the problem, of course, is that the business model is get you to use this thing as much as possible. Whatever else these companies want to say about that, they want you to use this thing all the time. And if we just let the commercial market run wild with that combination of ingredients, I think we're going to be in a very lonely and in some cases pretty psychotic kind of relationship with this technology. Hi,
Yeah.
everybody. Hi, welcome. This is the bummer
No,
We're headed
of
towards
of
psychosis,
my world.
everyone.
Yeah,
it's
I ruin
important.
every party I go to because of this. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
everyone wants to know, but no one wants to come to terms with it. It's like cancer, right? We know that if we eat sugar, if we drink, if we don't sleep, if we live in an unhealthy life, we understand. They've told us
Yeah.
that makes you more likely to get cancer. And yet there's plenty of people who know it and still struggle with the habit change. And it's not to blame anyone, to your point. Like,
Right.
it's a clear problem. Like, knowing and adjusting are two different things. And my God, did my brain want to go like 50 different places? But
Well,
what do you feel like? Go ahead. Go
I mean,
ahead.
I was going to ask you, you're, Laura, you are trying to make change happen in people, right? You are trying to engender change in people.
Mhm.
And I wonder whether you would agree, like one of the things that I think is most, so for me as someone who went, and had to quit drinking, one of the things they tell you in that process is that the opposite of addiction is connection. And I
Mm.
would say that change in isolation, positive change in isolation is really hard. And I wonder what you feel like how important sort of like, can we just, so we're sort of defining like our terms here, how important in your work do you find human connection to be, or do you think that a kind of chatbot experience can stand in for that, as so many companies are trying to tell us it can?
Well, first off, I love when people ask me questions. So, yay. Um, no, I mean, I would even go back one step to I think the most important first step is our connection to ourselves. And I think
Mm,
that's kind of the problem, right? Like, we look to other people to get what we're craving from ourselves. And I get it. That's how we're conditioned when we're young. We don't know better. Not all of our brains are developed yet. But the challenge is we're craving psychological safety and emotional connection and co-regulation, all these things that are kind of part of attachment and part of connection. But we don't know how to calm ourselves. We're not connected to ourselves. We don't know what we think. We don't know how we feel. We know what we don't want. And sometimes we know what we do want. That we don't even know what we want half the time. We're very unconscious. And
yeah.
I think a lot of what I talk about with people is like shaping who you want to be and understanding the path that creates. Like we understand if you're going to run a marathon, no one's really under the impression of like, okay, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go run a marathon. Like there's the understanding of you're going to be training for it and running in specific cadences and timing things and eating in a certain, like we understand the journey and the roadmap. People say they want to be a leader. People say they want to be happy or successful, but pain is part of that and a meaningful part of that. And that's the pain pleasure of dopamine, right? And people are just so uncomfortable with pain and they're afraid that if they connect to themselves, they're going to see all these ugly layers. So they outsource. And that's, I mean, a lot of what society has pushed us towards. So sadly, it's not a simple answer for me, but you'll get to know that's pretty common with me in general. um, I don't think chatbots can do the same thing as human to human connection. There's an energetic coherence that happens, there's a co-regulation, there's elements beyond just words. I do think that it can, to a detriment, validate, but like it depends how the users use it. But I'm guessing most people who are using it for attachment aren't using it to help them see the other side. They're trying to be kind of fall into that confirmation
Right,
bias.
right. I mean, so when, and Alicia, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this too, because like, so OpenAI, and I'm going to pick on them a little bit because they're the most commonly used product, right? ChatGPT is the big giant in this space right now. So when they went from what's called the 4.0 version to a 5.0 version, and when they made that switch, the problem that they were finding with the 4.0 version is that they had built it to be so sycophantic, right? It was so two thumbs up on everything you said. You said, I think I might want to, eat less fiber. It'll be like, good idea. That kind of like it was just full of full of reassurance and encouragement for people. So they switched to 5.0 and they recognized because it was the 4.0 version that a lot of these kids were using when they wound up either in a very serious mental health crisis or in some cases even taking their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the subject of all these lawsuits that have now been filed against OpenAI. So they switched to the 5.0 version, which was much less sycophantic. And they did this whole big product release. They had a big dog and pony show about where they showed the new release and so forth. And the number one thing that happened during the Q&A portion of that was people complaining about the switch to a less sycophantic version. They didn't like that the system was less, two thumbs up on everything. And I've been talking with people a lot about like, it's just so it's really part of the attitude I think of Silicon Valley in a lot of ways that like there's just not a huge amount of emotional awareness and not a huge amount of just emotional like education. And then you wind up with this attitude that like these things that are not just like a part of life, but really essential to life, they consider to be kind of optional or at least simulatable in a way that can make for a good product. So just the other day, or just this morning, in fact, I was just reading about a company that uh, has a product called You, Only Virtual, and it is literally supposed to be an AI chatbot of your dead family member or friend or whoever.
Oh, I've heard
Yeah.
this.
You saw
Yeah.
this Black Mirror episode, right? It's the one with John Hamm or whoever it is, right? I don't remember
Yeah.
what the exact episode, but right, it's the replace and literally the founder of this says, we think that humanity shouldn't have to deal with grief anymore. That grief shouldn't, that we
Mm.
just want to wipe grief out, essentially.
Oh.
You know what I mean? Like, so this attitude that like these painful and necessary human trials that are part of change, these guys think of as sort of a piece of friction that a product can kind of sand away. And I really worry. I mean, you guys know better than anybody, like how important the rough edges are, how important it is to be forged against challenge. Like that is, I mean, Laura, behind you, it says
My
change is
company is
challenge.
changed by challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
change by challenge. I mean, like
Um,
this is the thing. So like, I just think we're you know, between that and like all the rhetoric about like AI is going to do all your hard work for you, you'll never have to really write a thing again or think about it, you'll never have to write your wedding vows again or any of that kind of stuff, it just is all this this rhetoric of like, you don't have to do the work. You don't have to do work. And in fact, you don't even get to have a job anymore, is was really ultimately having. But I just think there's something about the rhetoric overall right now where there's a portion of people who seem to understand that they want to improve themselves, but there's also all of this rhetoric around you don't have to suffer in any real way. And I'm worried about that, I would say.
I think as a population, we've been primed for that.
Hmm.
Oh,
Our culture is so, where's the easy button? Like, what's the fastest way I can get this done? Work smarter, not harder kind of
yeah.
situation. So we're already primed and ready to hit the easy button with ChatGPT or Claude or whoever else you like, Grok, what's the other ones?
Yeah, there's Grok, there's Claude, there's uh,
Gemini, my
Gemini, there's
co-pilot.
Llama. That's right. There are all these big ones. That's right. That's right. You have your choice.
Yeah. Uh, and I have noticed already that ChatGPT is taking on a therapist role for a lot of my clients, and it's doing a decent job. They'll send
Hmm.
me screenshots and things that they're talking about with ChatGPT, and I'm like, damn, ChatGPT is kind of on point right now.
Hmm. Do you find that in those conversations, is it challenging them at all? Because that's the thing it didn't used to do. And
Mhm.
I was talking to a guy who makes a chatbot version of a recovery program. His is
Mm,
specifically around like internet addiction, porn addiction, various behavioral addictions. And
Hmm.
and he was saying how hard it was for him to um, that the off-the-shelf version of a lot of these chatbots wouldn't work because it would just be like two thumbs up, great idea, yeah, you should totally isolate yourself, great idea, and
right.
he needed to change it to say, actually, you know what you're saying doesn't make a lot of sense, or I've been listening to you over the last few weeks and I think you're deluding yourself on a thing, like the kind of stuff that like a tough therapist would have to say, especially in recovery. And what he said that was interesting to me was I was like, well, how hard is it to tweak the weights to make it do that? And he was like, it's surprisingly easy. That the system off the shelf is super sycophantic for a reason, for a marketing reason, right? It doesn't have to speak in the first person. It doesn't have to, pretend it's a human, right? It doesn't have to do any of that stuff. It's all marketing. It's just how it's dressed up. And he was just saying like, the fact that he can make it be a much more tough love recovery specialist speaks to just how it's built. So I don't know. I
Well, we
mean,
love that, right? We're
yeah,
craving validation. And
yeah.
like Laura was saying, we don't know how to validate ourselves. People have no idea how to do that.
Mhm.
Thank God for Laura, because we're always talking about that on here. But
Yeah.
um, again, I think in that way we're primed just culturally, not having strong connections, not having a lot of empowerment even as kids, looking for the gold star from your teacher or looking for the praise from your parents. And this goes back generations. This is, and like you were saying, this is a part of our DNA now.
Yeah,
It's literally ingrained in us.
yeah,
So we really are facing our own biology.
yes. I mean, so when I was writing the book and doing that Hacking Your Mind series for PBS, a huge part of the loop is about exactly that. So the big sort of construct that really changed my perspective on all of this is this idea that was popularized by a guy named Daniel Kahneman. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow that your readers probably your listeners probably know. So that book sort of was a summary of like 100 years of research into something called the dual process theory, which is this
Mm,
idea that you've got two brains, basically, not literally, but physically, but psychologically. One of them is a fast thinking, instinctive decision-making system that just grabs the cheesecake and in the old days, right on the open savanna, it was the one
mhm.
that grabbed the fruit quickly. It recognized a snake and ran for it. It was a system that just made it was just your autopilot survival system, and it makes and that system is ancient. It goes back millions of years. We have it in common with not just primates but even monkeys, like
Yeah.
small monkeys make decisions around that in that using that same kind of system. Then, like 200,000 years ago, when the humans that are currently all over the world first stood up on the what is now the continent of Africa and walked off to explore, they were the first ones who had developed this new brain, the slow thinking system two, which is the one that is like, what's over there? And I wonder why I'm having these weird dreams. And, what happens when we die? The creative, cautious, rational thinking, quote unquote, thinking brain, the brain that we think of as our sort of human brain. And the trouble, as all of these researchers will tell you, is we think we're using that second human brain most of the time, when in fact we're using the monkey brain almost all the time, right? And the thing about the monkey brain is it's really good at its job.
Mhm.
And the whole survival strategy way back when was don't think it through. And
Mhm.
so here's a so like if we're sitting here together, and a snake comes into the room, and we spend our time being like, what kind of snake is that? Is that a garter snake? Like, what is that snake? We're getting bit and dying, right? Or if fire, the room catches on fire, we're like, how bad is this fire? Those people are
Mhm.
long gone on the evolutionary tree, right? The ones who survived are the ones who were like, run, and
Right.
who not only are able to say that, but are able to communicate it without even speaking. And so here's a crazy you shut me up when I go on too long, but there's a crazy story from the Hacking Your Mind series and from behavioral science where there's this Dutch researcher named Beatrice de Gelder, who's very, very amazing. And for years, she was decried in a mostly male field for what she was about, which was like the weird ways in which we see and perceive stuff in ways that they just can't really measure. And everybody was sort of thought she was kind of a crackpot. But she then had these breakthroughs studying people who had, because of a stroke, lost their vision, but the brain and the eye was still working. The stroke had just cut off the connection at the visual cortex. So the wiring between the brain and the eye was broken. And she started, but these people had reported weird stuff that didn't jive with what we think of as the behavior and instincts of blind people. And so she would bring in these guys and do experiments. And she was just like striking out. Nothing was working, nothing was working. They were doing like dumb stuff like ventriloquism and all kinds of stuff. And they just weren't able to make it happen. And finally, they're on a lunch break one day. And this guy who's arrived with the help of his wife, he's got a cane, he's blind. They've been doing stuff with him all morning, and finally they say to him, "Hey, listen, would you just walk down this hallway?" And without telling him, they've put an obstacle course of like chairs and boxes and waste baskets down this hall in this academic building, and they don't tell him that stuff is there. And he's like, "Okay," and they take his cane from him, and he begins walking forward. And then they have video of this. You can see it on YouTube. He turns sideways and he avoids the first thing. And then he turns the other way and he avoids the second thing. He picks his way through this obstacle course without, he is blind. And he gets to the end of the hall and everyone freaks the fuck out. Excuse my French. But as you can imagine, they just lose their minds, right? And they come running up to him and they're like, "How did you do that?" And his answer was, "Do what?" He had no consciousness of doing any of this. His brain just did it, was moving his legs and keeping his balance and perceiving this stuff and getting him around it without even checking in with his consciousness. So that's as you can imagine, right? Huge breakthrough. Then they start playing around with, okay, they take people with that same thing and they hook them up in front of a big screen, a huge video screen, and they show images of people making big emotional faces, these huge faces that are grinning or frowning or making looking scared. And then they'd ask these people, "What do you see?" And they'd every time be like, "Are you kidding me? I'm blind. I keep telling you. Like, why are you bothering me?" But when they hooked their faces up with little sensors that detect the micromusculature of the face, then when you showed somebody a frown, then that person would instinctively start frowning. When you unconsciously, right? and they would mimic any emotion you threw at them. And so what she's proving is that there is some sort of extremely sophisticated and very redundant system, a system with multiple connections to the brain, clearly beyond the visual cortex, that is not only catching emotions from one another, but transmitting them. So we are somehow magically like, when a snake comes in the room and I go, oh, you can't, for those who are just listening, if I make a mask of horror with my face, then the two of you are also going to freak out and we're all going to stand up and run. And it turns out that even when we are, especially when we are from the same background, there's the comedian Cedric the Entertainer says that when he sees other black people running, you can't help but run. As a black man, and he's like, "We got to go," And it's that he's describing all of that perfectly because we are built for that. And so this instinctive system, to your point, Alicia, right, is so ancient and so fundamental to how we've survived all this time that it is kind of crazy that we would even have developed the ability to resist it at all. And my problem is that AI is the perfect way to reactivate that system and give it the reins again.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard of that experiment. I've heard of different experiments where they like split the lobes because of epilepsy and they've been able to test different things and like getting to know the brain has been one of the most fascinating things in my career. And I'm
Mhm.
like nerdily enjoying it. Like no one really wants to talk the science of it with me. My good friend Alicia deals with it because she loves me, but it's pretty extraordinary. And it always lands me at this same question. And I'm curious because, we're talking about the different brains that have developed, which is part of evolution, which one could argue is kind of why we're here. We have these three basic psychological needs: love, safety, and belonging, which is why our brain responds and adapts the way that it needs to in order to get what we need for psychological well being. And in a way, AI can mask as one of them, but
Mhm.
don't be deceived by the mask of it because it will still create the same problem. But the question I keep coming back to, and I regularly actually ask my clients, is what does it mean to be human?
Mhm. Mhm.
What is the value in being human? So, as someone who has kind of gone through this, I'm curious, what's your answer? What do you think it means to be human?
Well, I love that. I mean, so to dodge it and give myself a little time to think about it, I'll tell you one story about being in a room full of social scientists and behavioral scientists on one side of the table, and a bunch of the sort of early pioneers of the AI systems that we're now using on the other side of the table. This was like 2018, and the guy is making this presentation of this AI system, and he's like, "We're going to do this, this, and this." And as a result, at the end, we're going to arrive at a set of universal human values. And then
Oh,
he says, and now I'll take your questions. And every hand in the room goes up.
Yeah.
And the first person to answer, she's a political scientist, and she's like, I have three questions actually. What is universal? What is human? And what are values? And the whole meeting imploded, and nobody,
Yeah.
they all started shouting, and it was all over, right? Not shouting, but they walked out in silence. So it is such a hard question, and the people right now at the tops of these companies are pretending that they know in some way that it is, and even as they are damaging stuff that I would consider to be the most important stuff. So my closest connection to like the basics of being human came from a trip I got to take, also as part of this documentary series, to Tanzania,
Mm.
and I got to go spend about a week with this tribe in Tanzania that lives the way we all used to 60,000 years ago,
Yeah.
called the Hadza. And they are still like nomadic. They don't have any homes. They don't have any crops. They just hunt and eat fruit, and that's it. And that group, it's so interesting what they don't have. So they don't have last names. They
Mm.
don't have spouses. There's a sort of kind of an informal way where once you start sleeping next to somebody at the campfire, then that person sort of becomes your partner at the campfire for a while, kind of, and babies result from that. Like it's not a marriage arrangement, and it changed. They have multiple throughout their lives. Um, they have no word for a number greater than five
Mm,
because why would you need that? Right? They're not keeping track of stuff. Nobody's property is a thing. Um, And if there's more than five people around the fire, that's a lot of people. Like there's only five of them. Most of the time there's a lot, it's lots or five, right? And if you're going
yeah.
to meet somebody down the road, if you're going to meet them, trying to arrange to meet them see you in a couple of moons, see you in 5 moons, like that's as much as you would ever plan ahead into the future.
Mm,
And that for me kind of like winnows down what this definition is pretty tightly to the point where I'm like, yeah, it's basically I like your three. I mean, for me, yeah, I think it is a connection to others, right? Like our ability to make decisions is entirely about group dynamics, and our loyalty to our families is entirely what gives rise to questions of sort of abstract values and why you would want to, you know, behave better and, not just kill everybody, but be a generous and thoughtful person. That's entirely because you're connected to other humans, and I think that I mean, the big crossroads that we're at right now in terms of my assumptions about being human is that I really think the suffering and the change is the fundamental thing that separates us from how we used to be. Knowingly, there's that famous experiment, the marshmallow experiment, where they're like, you put a marshmallow in front of a kid and you say, "Don't eat this marshmallow, and I'll give you another one in 5 minutes." And
right.
like 95% of us can't do that because we're just not built for that. We're built to eat marshmallows right now. And so the transition that we needed to make to go from a world that was cruel and terrifying and short to the one in which we now can talk to people who aren't like us and cooperate and drive in our lane on the highway and all of that stuff had to do with saying, I'm not going to eat both marshmallows. I'm not going to eat this marshmallow right now. I'm going to wait 5 minutes.
Mhm.
And so I think the suffering and the transformative power of challenge. I think challenge is probably a better change is suffering. I can see why change by suffering is not your company name. Suffering is
Yeah.
not a good brand. Is not good branding.
No one would
But
want to talk to me.
yeah, no, it was talking about suffering. But like, challenging ourselves, foregoing short-term pleasure in the interest of something bigger and intangible
Mhm.
is a really the thing that is different between us and almost all other species. So that's a big one for me. I don't know if I've answered your question really, but
I
have
mean,
you?
you did maybe not as like it's this or this, but it's the experience, right? Like it's
Mhm.
not one thing, and I think that's relevant and important. It's the overarching experience. It's being in nature. It's being around people, being present. It's being able to connect. And the definition or lack of definition is very intriguing. Like it makes me think of a reel, I think it is on Instagram. It's like, I don't know why I feel so anxious and depressed. It's like, have you worked out lately? No. Have you eaten well? No. Have you journaled? No. Have you slept? No. Like it's like they go through all the things that you should do to like engage and like be well. And it's like, no, I haven't done anything. It's like, well, I don't know why I feel this way. It's like,
Right.
and like, I think that's what's scarier is like we talk about isolation, addiction, suicide, depression, anxiety. Like, what we don't realize is the more we're drawn away from like what it means to be human, those things are sadly only going to grow. And
Mhm.
I think there's a responsibility, and maybe responsibility is not the right word, opportunity could be the right word
Mhm.
to each individual to choose and like see like the companies that are creating these AI bots, Instagram, socials, whatever, they aren't doing it to try and help you. They are doing it for money.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that sucks. And it's very addicting. And there's plenty of people who have been on it and get addicted. And I get why it goes with the biological features, right? But even with that being there, same reason why people stop drinking. Like we have the opportunity to choose how we experience our own lives. So we can unplug, hook into their system, go with AI, go with socials, be inhumane, feel depressed, struggle in isolation, and have kind of a probably empty life. Like I can't say that indefinitely, but like with everything we read about what it means to have a fulfilling and meaningful life, it's not absent of struggle. It's not absent of suffering. Like
Mm,
what I think is the hardest thing for people to grasp because they don't want to is how paradoxical life is.
mm, mm,
Like love and grief, same thing.
mhm,
You can't have
mhm.
grief without love. You can't have love without grief. So even with the bot that's trying to get rid of grief, we don't look at like what are you actually doing though? If someone doesn't know how to grieve, they're gonna lose a job, they're gonna move, they're not their favorite snack's not gonna be in stock at the grocery store. And because they have no emotional regulation, they're gonna act like an ape. It's like we're literally creating the world to unevolve.
Yes, to go backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the thing I really worry about. And yeah, to your point about you know, these companies aren't thinking about your well-being, at least not the way that you would want them to. You know, they are in as much as they want you to like continue to function as a customer, you know, and
Right, right.
broadly speaking, they would say they want to make the world better. Of course, their rhetoric is always about that. But you know, so early on, one of the big chatbot companies, I was talking to some people there, and they were describing a problem that they were a sort of a thinking problem that they were having, a philosophical question inside the company, and it was they called it the heroin problem. And what it was okay, let's say you're making the perfect, you know, this is before ChatGPT or anything else. They were like, okay, let's say you're trying to make the perfect AI assistant that is like, you know, anticipates your needs and is trying to help you in all at all times, and you're addicted to heroin. What's it supposed to do? Is it supposed to facilitate your addiction? It's going to find you the best price on heroin. It's going to, you know, make sure your meetings with your dealer are in places where you won't get arrested. It's going to make sure that you don't have morning meetings when you're junk sick. You know, like, is it going to facilitate it, or is it going to try and get you off of heroin and get you hooked up with a detox and a sponsor and a blah 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 blah? You know, and the fact that this was a question in their mind speaks to how weird their kind of all-in-one perspective is on, and how like naive their perspective on human beings is, that they don't think of it as their job to improve you as much as to serve your desires without really understanding where the desires and the instincts are overlapping in a negative way. And so like, yeah, what you're saying, Laura, really resonates for me because it's really like yeah, if you do away with grief, you're doing away with love. And if you do away with and if you make somebody just as capable of loving a virtual version of their deceased family member as they were of loving the person when they were alive, have we lost love entirely? Like, you know, so for me, I don't know. So one thing I think about just would love to hear from you guys about like what, because you're in the business of trying to help people put some boundaries around themselves and make good choices when it comes to their brains and their bodies, right? When you think about, you know, I think of AI as, you know, of the chatbot experience anyway, as very much you know, like a like a food substitute that doesn't actually give you a lot of the things that you need. There's some of it that you know, it gives you some of it, right? But it's like it's cheesecake, right? It gives you the all of the feelings of a full, rich meal without being actually good for you in some way. And so we know to eat a little bit of cheesecake, you know, or you know, and we know how to eat like a balanced meal, like all that stuff. But there's no sense of balance with this AI stuff. And I'm just wondering, like, if you were to port over some of what you teach people about restraint and challenge and the rest of it to, I mean, this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you guys, is like to just know, like, if you're in the business of trying to get people to challenge themselves to improve themselves, and you now have this thing that's promising to take away all challenge, how do we like port over what we've learned about exercise and diet and therapy and the rest of it to thinking better about this stuff than just like, let's all go crazy with it?
Please, you want to go first?
That's a great question.
I mean, if
I
we can
don't think
solve
I
this one
answered your
right now, we're gonna really make history. So we don't have to solve it, but I would love to just hear your thoughts about it.
I don't think I answered your question from earlier, and I think the answer is my favorite answer. It depends.
Mm,
Is what is in my mind. Because a lot of what you get from AI depends on what you're putting in. What are you asking it? Are you asking it to challenge you? Are you asking it to analyze your speech and call you out for facts? Or are you just asking it to make it flow better? Are you
yeah.
asking it to tell you where you could improve in this conversation? Or are you asking it if you're right in this
Mm,
conversation?
mm,
So I think we still have some control, I guess you could say, if depending on how we're using it. And then I also know of people who are trying to get their algorithms into AI that would be more challenging because if we can challenge our egos, which is a big part of the problem here, if we can challenge our automations, then we can actually elevate our consciousness. And if everybody was doing that, then that would be really great for the population. But there's a lot of caveats of like, will we let that happen? Will they let that happen, if you will? Um, will people want to buy that is another question.
mm.
You know, there's a lot of depending situations right now. And certainly the way we're headed politically doesn't look like anybody gives a shit about regulating anything.
Right.
So that's not very encouraging for me. Uh, but I
Yeah.
still have hope because,
Mhm.
I want to believe that we can kind of take back control and do what's best for us, not what feels good,
Yeah.
but we shall
Yeah.
And,
see.
and even feels good temporarily. Like it's like sugar, feels good and then it goes away, right?
Mhm.
Um, it makes me think of Eckhart Tolle. And when we went and saw him in Miami, one of the things he talked about is like we might not like how our like device, our vehicle, the human body was manufactured, but pain creates consciousness. And what are we doing is continually trying to get out of pain, out of discomfort, out of invalidation, which is where the AI bots are kind of more nerve wracking. But to answer your original question, I go to the biology. So a lot of times when I have someone who's wanting to grow and wanting to like have a say in how they change, I explain to them like what it actually means in terms of how your brain works, the motivational system, what their priorities are, the fast versus the slow, re-signaling. It's like literally like exercise for your brain, like retraining how your brain works, understanding the pain pleasure balance. But I will say one of the more meaningful pivots with pain is I'll have people write down like 3 to 5 of the most meaningful and important moments of their life.
Mm,
And then I'll have them write out like why. And then the last question I'll ask them is, was it void of challenge or struggle?
mm,
And every single time the answer is no.
mm,
And I'm like, okay, what does that tell you about the role struggle and challenge plays in the person you want to create and the experiences you want to facilitate and cultivate in your life? Like, I understand our mechanism wants to avoid pain, crave pleasure, and conserve energy. Like, that is the motivational triad. But you're also not a victim to that triad. That's when you give yourself enough space to wonder and to be curious about, is this worth pursuing? Like, why do we want to exercise? Most people don't want to exercise, but they also don't want to get cancer or don't want to be ill or don't want to be in pain if they're already in pain. And when you engage in certain habits, like that's the feature of the human body that does facilitate positivity. What I do a lot of with my clients is experimentation to retrain their nervous system so that they can get more up to date data of what feels true to the person they are today versus maybe the conditioning they had from 5 or 10 years ago.
I
yeah. I
have a
love that.
question.
Yeah.
Uh, this is shifting just a little bit, but I saw recently that someone posted that AI is starting to become conscious. Now, I have a very hard time believing that AI can become conscious. However, I also saw that AI is starting their own social media where they bitch about humans.
Mhm.
And I was
Mhm.
reading some of the things that it was saying, and I was like, well, shit, now I don't know. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the sort of the like AI as consciousness, is AI conscious is very much like a marketing thing for the companies. I think that they really want you thinking about that because they want you thinking about just how important their product is. I think it's also part of why there's a weird tendency of among the AI companies to talk very openly about the potential for this thing to become some sort of Terminator and take over the world. Like they talk about that very in a way that like as a journalist is weird. Like in the old days, companies tended to sort of downplay negative effects of their stuff rather than sort of making it a thing they boast about. But I think it is also part of the thing of them just trying to say like, look how important what we have built is. And at the same time, there are a couple of very notable, um, very big deal sort of founders of AI kind of people who basically say the path that we're on currently, this large language model path, where you're just hoovering up all of the world's information and making a kind of greatest hits medley of it and making that look like conversation, um, is not actually the architecture we would even need to build to even be on the path toward a thing that actually learns on the go. Like right now, when you are, using a chatbot, it's not even it knows in the iteration that it and you in the conversation that you and it are having, it knows everything it's going to know, and it's not learning anything new from what you're saying in terms of its actual experience of the world. It can pull in some memory over the course of the conversation that's literally just like a cut and paste feature of like, this is, her name is Alicia and she lives in Tampa. Like it can pull in little facts, but it doesn't know, uh, it isn't learning in any real sense. So in terms of the architecture of it, it's just not on that path, according to the really smart people. And in fact, that one of the big thinkers on this stuff is a guy named Jan LeCun. He just recently quit Meta, where he was the head of AI, specifically because he just looked around and he thought everybody was kind of buying into that idea in a way that he thought was
Mm.
stupid, and he's going off and starting his own company as a result. And this is a guy who's been working in this stuff forever. So so I'm not worried about that part of it. Um, but it also, I think, doesn't have to be conscious to trick people into thinking it is.
Yeah.
And
Right.
our brains are really primed to believe, this is the basis of superstition. I would argue in some cases it's the basis of religion, right? We are primed to attribute magical thinking to stuff we don't understand. And
Mhm.
this is the perfect one of those, which is why people are like, this thing understands me. It knows me better than my own parents do, that kind of stuff. And it's a real problem. It really plays on our instincts. So I really like what both of you are saying just about this idea of like, can you like I've been trying to not to stop being all about how dangerous and dark it could all be, and starting to get to instead this thing where I'm like I'm fundamentally very optimistic about human beings. I'm a huge fan. I just love how far we've come. Like if you look at how we used to live, oh my God, how much better life is now. And our capacity to just make a nice life for each other is such a beautiful thing. And so I'm trying to think of my thoughts about AI much more around like how are we going to protect what's important about being human? And I've always said it's stuff like our connection to each other, our creativity, our ability to make choices, that kind of stuff. But you guys are really making me realize like I want to add to that list like our capacity to challenge ourselves, I think is a huge one that I hadn't really considered before this conversation. And I think that will people pay money for that? On the one hand, I'm like, well, that doesn't seem likely. On the other hand, I'm like, well, hell, we pay for gym memberships. We pay we pay for meal plans. We pay for all kinds of things that challenge us. So maybe we can get to a place where we recognize like, oh, you know what? To preserve my ability to make good choices, I'm not going to use this thing all the time, or I'm going to use it only in a form where it challenges my thinking. I'm going to use it as a treadmill rather than as a assistive device. Um,
Right.
So I don't know, there's something powerful about that.
Oh,
Well, that's one of the
hey.
questions I wanted to ask you is like safe use cases where it's not, completely muting our brain chemistry, but it's aiding, or like one of the things that I'll do with it sometimes is I'll use it as a backboard. Like if I'm unclear with an idea, like I'll throw something at it and it'll bring something back and I'll be like, no, that's not right. Like it's kind of like this, but it's not like that. So like I've used it to help me figure out what's true in my brain, but I always come from a place of already like I know the energetic signature of the right direction. I just don't have the words to articulate it in a way that would make sense to people. And I don't even know if that's a safe use case. So I guess you mentioned you're not worried about it becoming conscious. So I'm curious what you are worried about, but I'm
Yeah.
also curious about safe use cases.
Well, so I'm overall I'm worried about its doing to our ability to make good choices what basically Google Maps did to our sense of direction, right? Or like you say, or what cell phones did to our ability to memorize a 7-digit number, right? Like we are losing some, the brain is a muscle, and if you don't exercise it, it's not like a computer you can turn off, put in the closet, and turn back on in 10 years. Like it's a
Right,
muscle. And so I worry about our muscles atrophying around some really fundamental stuff. And making choices is one thing. Connecting to other people, also a muscle that you have to exercise. So I have some worries about sort of just the social effects of it on people. I worry very much about what it's going to do to people's jobs. On the one hand, the promise is that it's going to make everybody more productive. On the other hand, in the past, when we've been forced to be more productive, we've been forced to do the jobs of multiple people, and typically for the same money.
right.
And and so I really worry about that thing. I especially worry about how it's going to affect non-college educated women and people from underserved communities, because I think the good middle class jobs that were available to people without a college education in this country were things like clerical, bookkeeping, admin, and those are all going to get wiped out by this.
Mm.
And so it's the short term. This is why those companies don't want to talk about job loss. They want to talk about the Terminator, but they don't want to talk about job loss.
Right.
So, but like safe cases or cases in which I think it can actually like serve the purpose of making us a better version of ourselves, or amplifying what's good about being human. It's a great teacher, right? For me, I learn, like, as someone who learns new stuff for a living,
Mhm.
having it explain banking policy, or, European tech regulations, or, there's all kinds of really complicated stuff that I really like it as an instructor on. The trouble is, I think it's a great tool on the far side of the hard thinking you have to do first. So,
Mm.
like, once you've read the book, discussing the book with it, or once you've come up with your thesis for in my case, like the story I'm going to write, then checking that thesis against its ability to do research for you. Um, you know, as opposed to saying, what's my thesis? Or, what should my thesis be? Or summarize this book for me, where it is replacing the challenging mental work of being individual
Mm.
that's a really important thing. So like, one study that just came out recently showed that if you this this was presented at a big academic conference, and was kind of the big talk of this academic conference around AI, called NeurIPS. And the paper basically was looked at 70 different LLMs, Claude AI, Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, all of these different models that were available all over the world. And they put like tens of thousands of big creative questions into these systems, prompts that were not like, tell me a recipe for chicken, but like, you know, write me a poem about time.
Mm.
And what they did was they poured that into these systems over and over again, and they over time realized that each individual LLM was arriving at a smaller and smaller range of possible outputs. It was
Mm.
not becoming more creative over time, it was becoming less creative over time. And the 70 different versions of this thing were also converging over time into giving similar answers. So it's not like you go to Claude and you're getting another better brain. you're
Right.
you're getting, it turns out, the same brain because it's all trained on the same stuff. And so in the end, these poems that it was kicking out were poems that all were like, time is a river, blah, 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 this cliche about time. And so that's what I think we need to resist is like, if you give it the creative work that your brain is great at, because human beings and this slow thinking brain is great at thinking things through in a creative way when you train it to do so, we have to protect that because that's how we get great art and music and, love and all of the great things that make us human. And so I think it's just like, you got to do a little bit of that upfront work. And then if you want to use it to double check your work, you want to get it to expand your thinking once you've come up with your thesis, you want to get it to talk about the book you loved with you, go for it. That's how I think about it.
I
Mm,
think a big key factor in a lot of what you're saying today is that we first have to accept that we're vulnerable to
Mm,
AI.
yeah.
Because I
yeah.
think so many humans don't like to accept the fact that we could be manipulated or that we could be tricked or that we could, So we have to accept that vulnerability as a human first. And then
Mhm.
we have a chance, I think, of
Mhm.
using it safely or, developing it more in a healthy way.
I think that's absolutely right. I like that a
Yeah,
lot. That makes a lot of sense to me.
I think that's wise too.
Yeah.
Thanks,
You
guys.
guys, we've sorted a lot out here. I feel like we've
Yeah.
done a really good job.
We're
I'm
so
impressed.
productive.
We are productive. Good job, humans.
Way to go.
And
Man,
so
I feel
far,
like
I will say this, although it is helpful as a therapy tool, most of my clients still want to run it by me. They still want to come talk to me. They still want to
That's
see me in
good.
person. So it's still missing a little bit of the human touch. Now, I know it's still developing, so we'll see how it all turns out. But so far, I think people still benefit most from human interaction.
well, I think like we discovered this with COVID, right? Like
Yeah.
you were doing video like meetings with people and you were having conversations and you were getting a version of connection, but we couldn't exactly communicate what was missing. And it's the energetics of all of it. Like we don't
Mhm.
like to think about what that is for us, but like whether it's the mind or your spirit or whatever the hell you want to call it, like laughter is contagious. Why did the blind people like reflect back what they were seeing? Like we have mirror neurons for a reason. Like we are designed so intentionally to be human and to be in pain. And like even if this does go the way where we're like unevolving back towards ape, like we're going to be more depressed. We will see a spike in it, suicide. Like more pain will happen. And with more pain, maybe I'm just hopeful because I understand how the body works, but more people will wake up and be like, wait, this isn't working. I don't like this anymore.
Mm.
And they'll start to see, like, I like people are already seeing it. People who get off social media, people who
Yeah.
aren't using AI as much. Like, we recognize that we need breaks from certain things. Dry January, right? Like, we have these different slogans. So I don't know if that'll be the long term, like, we can do it, but I have faith in like the intricate way of our biology and how it intertwines to keep us in a pain pleasure balance. I think what sucks is it's going to be a lot more pain before people wake up. And I think
Mhm.
that's where we have freedom to choose what that threshold is for us.
Yeah. 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 I think fundamentally, if I take one thing away from this conversation, it's this idea that like, you asked me what is being human. I think it really has to do with like being human is being with other humans. Like
Mhm.
that's really the thing. And this system, these technologies and these companies want to trick you into thinking that that's not necessary. And I think that what we're settling on here in this conversation is just how important it is that we
Agreed.
be around each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
Well, we
thank
could go like
you.
a million miles an hour and talk for another 3 hours, and I wish we had that time. I mean, damn, we should have a book club ourselves just to talk about this. But
I
thank you
know.
so much for everything you shared, the insights, the stories, your experience. I think it's really, 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 really important, especially in a space where, for the first time in reality, we don't have a shared reality anymore.
That's
And
Mm.
that's
right.
really dangerous. And I don't think people realize it. And we aren't victims to it. We do have a choice. We just have to think slower so we can choose.
Oh,
Mm.
so good,
Love
Laura.
it. Love it.
What a great closing. No, thank you
Yeah.
so much for being with us today. This has been great. Appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.